Now I have a thorough understanding of the original story. Let me write a completely new story, applying the formula with new characters, none from the banned list, American setting, and all the improvements identified from the comment analysis. My daughter-in-law's name will be set as a toxic influencer type, the father as a retired postal worker, more relatable than firefighter, avoids the Medicare insurance plot holes, and I'll fix the logic gaps the commenters caught. I had the envelope in my jacket pocket before we even left the house, $640 in cash, every bill I'd been setting aside since February, tucking 5s and 10s into the coffee can on the top shelf of the pantry where Margaret kept her spare reading glasses. She never asked what I was saving for. She trusted me the way she trusted me for 46 years, quietly, completely, without condition. That trust was the thing that kept me upright on the drive over. It was May 11th, a Sunday. Mother's Day, the kind of warm evening in Columbus, Ohio, that tricks you into thinking summer has already arrived. The air soft and smelling of cut grass, the sky going orange over the strip malls and parking lots of the eastern neighborhood. Margaret sat in the passenger seat of my 2011 Buick LeSabre, wearing a blue dress I hadn't seen in 2 years. She'd pressed it herself that morning despite her hands. I'd heard the iron click on at 7, heard her moving slowly around the bedroom, doing what she always did when she wanted to feel like herself again. "You look beautiful," I told her when she came out. She smiled and smoothed the fabric over her hips. "It still fits." We pulled into the lot of Marcello's Grill at 6:10. It was a good restaurant, the kind with a proper host stand and cloth napkins and main courses that cost what I used to earn in a full shift. My son had chosen it. Of course he had. I helped Margaret out of the car. She moved carefully, favoring her right ankle. The neuropathy had been getting worse since January, that creeping numbness that crawled up from her toes and made the ground feel uncertain beneath her feet. She took my arm, and we walked toward the entrance together. The valet, a teenager in a red vest, gave the Buick a look. I handed him the keys without a word. That's when I heard it. The sound of something expensive. A slate-grey Mercedes GLE pulled to the curb behind us, and my son stepped out before the engine had fully stopped. Brendan, 43 years old. The same dark eyes I'd seen in the mirror for 30 years. The same jaw, but everything else about him had been replaced by money. The suit was charcoal, tailored clothes. The shoes were a shade of brown that didn't exist in nature. He'd had his teeth done sometime in the last year, I noticed. They were very white. "Dad, Mom." He came to us with his arms spread. He hugged Margaret carefully, the way you hug something fragile. "Happy Mother's Day." Then the passenger door opened. Natalie stepped out. Natalie. Then the passenger door opened. Natalie stepped out. Natalie, my daughter-in-law, 38 years old, dark hair worn loose, wearing a dress the color of champagne that I was fairly certain cost more than my monthly pension check. She moved the way women move when they spend considerable time practicing looking effortless. She had a phone in her hand. She always had a phone in her hand. Catherine. She kissed the air beside Margaret's cheek. "I love that dress. Is it vintage?" My wife was not named Catherine. My wife was not named Catherine. My wife's name was Margaret. Natalie knew this. She had known this for 9 years. "It's just a dress," Margaret said pleasantly. Of course. Natalie's eyes had already moved on. She was looking at her phone, tilting it slightly, catching the evening light. I watched her take a photograph of the restaurant entrance. For her social media, probably. She had 90,000 followers on Instagram. She called herself a lifestyle content creator. I was not sure what that meant, but I knew it involved photographing food before eating it and writing captions about gratitude while her mother-in-law rationed blood pressure medication. Inside, the restaurant hummed with the particular warmth of a Sunday in May. Families, couples, a few tables of older women dressed in their best. Our table was in the center of the room. 4 seats, white cloth, a small candle burning in a glass holder. Margaret eased into her chair with visible relief and rested her hands in her lap. I watched her fingers still. She always did that when they started to shake, pressed them flat against her thighs and waited. Brendan was already studying the menu. Natalie was photographing the bread basket. No flash, the waiter said politely. House policy. Natalie looked at him the way you look at something that has made an inconvenient noise. Then she put the phone in her purse and smiled with all her teeth. Of course. Sorry. The waiter's name was Andrew. Young, maybe 22, dark-haired, the kind of careful and attentive that you learn working tables at a place like this. He took our drink orders. Brendan asked about a specific Cabernet, and Andrew described 2 options with genuine knowledge. Natalie ordered sparkling water. So did I. Margaret asked for hot tea the way she always did, and I saw her study the prices on the right side of the menu with the same quiet dread I felt in my own chest. $42 for the salmon, $58 for the lamb. The cheapest entree was a $30 pasta dish. I said nothing. I had known since 3 o'clock that afternoon, when I had sat down with the manager in his small office off the kitchen and laid $640 on his desk, that I would not need to worry about the prices. The manager's name was Paul Easterwood, 50, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had run a restaurant long enough to have seen most things. He looked at the bills, looked at me, looked at Margaret waiting in the lobby, and then looked back at me. Why? He asked. Because I know my son's wife, I said, and I know tonight is not going to go the way my wife deserves. Paul was quiet for a moment. He looked at the money again. Whatever the total is, if it goes over that, it's on the house, he said. But I'll tell you something else first. I looked at him. My grandfather ate at this restaurant every Sunday for 12 years, Paul said. His wife had Parkinson's. He brought her every single week, even when she couldn't eat much of anything, because he said it was the one place she felt like herself. He picked up the envelope and tucked it into his jacket pocket. I understand what you're doing. I'll take care of it. I thanked him and went back to Margaret. Now, sitting at the table with the candle between us and my daughter-in-law, photographing the interior of her sparkling water glass, I thought about what it had cost to put that money together, the heating bill I'd paid late, the haircut I hadn't gotten, the bottle of wine I'd passed over 3 times at the grocery store, because it was $11, and I was counting $11. Brendan closed his menu. I'm doing the ribeye. Me too, Natalie said. Then she looked at Margaret with the particular kind of smile that is not really a smile. Catherine, you should try the salmon. It's their signature dish. I'll have the pasta, Margaret said quietly. Are you sure? The pasta is very heavy, I'm sure. Natalie shrugged, the way you shrug at someone who has made an insignificant decision incorrectly. She picked up her phone again and typed something. I watched her thumbs move. So, Brendan said, looking up, how's the Buick holding up? Fine, I said. You should really think about trading it in. We can help with that. I'd been meaning to say something. This was how my son talked to me now, in offers of help that did not involve helping, in suggestions that implied I was not managing. He had been doing it for 4 years, since the business had started going well, since Natalie had started teaching him that success was not only a financial condition but a social one, that the people around you were a reflection of your status, and that his parents were a poor reflection. I didn't say any of that. I said, it runs fine. Margaret reached under the table and found my hand. The appetizers arrived. Natalie had ordered the beef carpaccio without mentioning it to anyone. Brendan had ordered calamari. Neither had suggested anything for Margaret. Andrew set a small bread plate in front of my wife, and she ate 1 piece of bread, slowly, carefully, the way she ate everything now, measuring what her body could handle. I ate the bread too. I wasn't particularly hungry. I had not been particularly hungry in a long time. Then Natalie set down her fork and looked across the table at Margaret with an expression I didn't trust. It was warm in the theatrical way, the way warmth arrives when it has been decided in advance. We actually have some news, she said. Brendan looked up. He nodded slightly. What kind of news? Margaret asked. Natalie reached into her purse and produced her phone. She turned it toward us, and on the screen was what I recognized as a real estate listing. A house. A large house, white colonial, photographed from the driveway in golden artine light. "We're buying a new house," Natalie announced, "in Upper Arlington. 7 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, a pool." Margaret looked at the photograph. "That's beautiful," she said. "It's $4.2 million. Natalie said it the way you say a number that you want people to feel. "But Brendan thinks it's a great investment, and I've always wanted a pool." I said nothing. "You should come see it," Brendan said to his mother, without looking up from his own phone now. He'd had it out for the last 5 minutes. "When we close, probably July." "I'd love that," Margaret said. "We'll have to see about timing," Natalie said immediately. "We're doing the whole interior before we move in. It's going to be very busy, but maybe in the fall." Margaret's smile stayed in place with the particular effort of a woman who has had decades of practice keeping her smile in place. "I thought about the letter I'd received 6 weeks ago, March 26th. Blue envelope, return address from the pharmacy benefit management company that handled what was left of my retiree health coverage from my 31 years with the USPS. 1 paragraph. Effective May 1st, your coverage tier will be reclassified. Your monthly out-of-pocket responsibility for Tier 3 medications will increase from $47 to $399. Margaret took 3 Tier 3 medications, blood pressure, cholesterol, and a low-dose blood thinner her cardiologist had added after the incident last October, when I'd woken at 2 in the morning to find her sitting at the kitchen table, unable to fully catch her breath. The ER had kept her overnight. The bill was $8,400, still unpaid, still growing. $319 a month for the medications, more than twice what we'd been paying. I had not told Margaret about the letter. "Are you okay?" Brendan asked. He was looking at his mother. "Fine," she said. "Just a little tired." "You should get more sleep," Natalie said. We ordered. Brendan the ribeye, Natalie the pan-seared halibut, plus a side of roasted vegetables, plus a request for a specific modification that Andrew wrote down patiently. Margaret, the pasta she'd already decided on. I ordered the roasted chicken, the second cheapest entree on the menu, and then felt immediately and then set that feeling aside. During the main course, Natalie talked about the house. She talked about it for 40 minutes. The kitchen renovation, the specific marble she'd been sourcing from a supplier in Vermont, the wall colors she'd been considering, the pool contractor who was booked out until September, but worth the wait. Brendan ate his ribeye and interjected occasionally with numbers. Square footage, resale value, the neighborhood school district ratings, which I noted because they had no children. Margaret listened. She asked polite questions. She ate her pasta slowly, and I watched the pasta go about half-eaten before she set her fork down and folded her hands in her lap and pretended she was full. She wasn't full. Her appetite had been poor for months. The blood pressure medication sometimes did that. I was watching her when I noticed the thing she'd been hiding. Her right hand, the one resting under the table, pressed against her thigh. The sleeve of her blue dress had shifted slightly, and I could see the inside of her wrist. A bruise, large, turning greenish at the edges. A week old, maybe more. I knew where it had come from. She'd fallen 2 weeks ago in the kitchen reaching for something on the upper shelf. The neuropathy had made her uncertain on her feet, and she'd gone down against the counter. She told me it was nothing. She'd rolled down her sleeve. Now I looked at that bruise and thought about the $640 in Paul Easterwood's jacket pocket, and thought about $4.2 million and marble countertops sourced from Vermont. Natalie had stopped talking about the house. She was looking at her phone, one thumb scrolling, one hand holding her water glass. Brendan had pushed his empty plate to the side and was typing something. Neither of them was looking at Margaret. Margaret was looking at the candle. "Mum," I said quietly. She looked at me. Her eyes were steady. That was the thing about Margaret that had never changed in 46 years. Whatever was happening inside her, whatever hurt or scared her, her eyes stayed steady. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "I'm good," she said. "I'm good, honey." Brendan looked up briefly. "You look tired, Mum," he said. "I'm good, honey." Brendan looked up briefly. "You look tired, Mum," he said. "You should take better care of yourself." He said it the way you say something you said before and expect to say again, with no particular weight. Then he looked back at his phone. Margaret turned back to the candle. I reached under the table and held her hand. Andrew appeared to clear the plates. Natalie ordered dessert without consulting anyone, a flourless chocolate torte and a cappuccino. Brendan added a slice of cheesecake. Andrew looked at Margaret, and she shook her head gently. He looked at Margaret, and she shook her head gently. He looked at me. Nothing, thanks. When Andrew left with the plates, Natalie set her phone face up on the table and leaned back in her chair with the satisfied posture of someone who has made good decisions. She looked at Margaret in that way again. The theatrical warmth. "Catherine," she said, "I have to ask you something." "Of course," Margaret said. "Brendan and I have been thinking about the holidays." Natalie glanced at my son, who nodded slightly without looking up. "We're going to be in the new house by Christmas, obviously, and we want to host. But we're thinking it might be nice to have a more intimate celebration, just the two of us. Start our own traditions, you understand." Margaret's hands, folded in her lap, went very still. "Of course," she said. "We'll do something with you before the holidays, obviously." Natalie picked up her water glass. "Maybe a brunch, something easy. That sounds nice," Margaret said. Neither of them saw what I saw. The small, careful breath Margaret took. The way she pressed her hands flat against her thighs. The way the steadiness in her eyes required, just for a moment, visible effort. "I am going to be honest with you. I had been patient for 4 years. I had watched my son drift toward a version of himself I didn't fully recognize, watched him learn from his wife that gratitude was for people who couldn't afford better, watched him stop asking questions about us because the answers made him uncomfortable. I had told myself it was a phase. I had told myself he would find his way back. I had told myself that the right thing was to wait, to stay available, to love him without conditions, and trust that the son I'd raised was still in there. But that night, watching Margaret absorb the news that she would not be welcome in her son's home for Christmas, watching her hold her hand still and say, of course, that sounds nice, I felt something shift. Not anger. Something quieter. The kind of certainty that comes when you finally stop hoping you misread the situation. Andrew brought the desserts. He also brought the leather check presenter and set it in the center of the table with a small, neutral, professional nod. Natalie reached for it first. I watched her open it. I watched her eyes move down the column of numbers. I watched the small vertical line appear between her brows. The calculation. The conclusion. She set the presenter down and looked at Andrew. "We'll need to split this," she said. "2 separate checks. Can you do that?" Andrew hesitated. "I can certainly, their portion and our portion," Natalie indicated with one manicured finger. "We'll cover ours. They can handle theirs." She said it plainly, without emphasis. The way you explain something obvious to someone who might not have caught up yet. "We're not paying for them. They can handle theirs." Andrew looked at my son. Brendan was looking at the tablecloth. Not at Andrew, not at me, not at his mother. At the tablecloth. And then he said very quietly, "That's fine." 2 words. "That's fine." I sat with that for one breath. I looked at Margaret. Her face had not changed. Her hands had not moved. She was still watching the candle with those steady eyes. And I understood, watching her, that this was not the first time something like this had happened. That she had been absorbing small versions of this for years. That she was very, very good at absorbing them. Andrew was beginning to apologize, saying something about needing to speak with the manager. "Please go get him," I said. Andrew nodded and disappeared. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the folder I'd been carrying since this afternoon. A manila folder, not thick but organized. I set it on the table in front of me without opening it. Natalie looked at it. "What is that?" I didn't answer. Brendan finally looked up from the tablecloth. "Dad." "In a moment," I said. Poor Easterwood came through the dining room without hurrying. He was a man who knew when something required his presence, and when it required his composure. Both, in this case. He stopped at our table and looked at all 4 of us. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "We'd like separate checks," Natalie said. "Our meals and theirs." Paul looked at her. Then he looked at me. I gave him the smallest nod. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Paul said. Natalie's smile stayed but thinned. I'm sorry. The check for this table was settled this afternoon, Paul said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced the envelope. At 3 o'clock, in full, by this gentleman. He set the envelope on the table. The dining room, which had been a comfortable hum of conversation and silverware, had gotten quieter in the way rooms get quieter when something is happening that isn't supposed to happen in a restaurant. Brendan stared at the envelope. What? I paid for dinner, I said, this afternoon, before we arrived. Natalie looked from Paul to me. Something moved across her face, fast, the quick recalculation of someone trying to find the angle. That doesn't make any sense, she said. Why would you? Because I knew, I said, that you would do exactly what you just did. The table to our left had gone completely quiet. A woman in her 60s, pearl earrings, glass of red wine, was looking at us with undisguised attention. 3 tables back, a man had turned in his chair. Brendan's voice was careful. Dad, I don't think I'm going to show you some things, I said. I opened the folder. The first document was a letter. I'd printed it at the library because our printer had been broken since November and we'd stopped buying ink. The letterhead was from the Pharmacy Benefit Management Company. I laid it on the table and smoothed it flat. This came in March, I said. Your mother doesn't know about it. Margaret looked at the letter. I watched her read the first paragraph, watched her face change. Your mother takes 3 medications that keep her heart stable and her blood pressure managed, I said. I was speaking to Brendan, but my voice was steady and level, and I wasn't lowering it. As of May 1st, our out-of-pocket cost for those medications went from $47 a month to $319 a month. Brendan said nothing. We take home about $2,200 a month, I continued. Between my postal pension and her Social Security, we pay $1,400 in rent. We pay utilities. We pay for food. I set the letter aside and picked up the next document, an itemized bill from the emergency room. In October, your mother had a cardiac event. Nothing serious enough for an overnight stay. The bill is $8,400. We've been paying $50 a month. I set that document down next to the first. I want to show you the math, I said. Not because I want your money. I want to show you the math so you understand what it costs, right now, today, for your mother to stay alive. The table to our left had not resumed eating. The man behind Brendan had turned completely around in his chair. I was aware of phones being picked up, of the small adjustments people make when they realize they are witnessing something real. Brendan was looking at the documents with an expression I hadn't seen on him in years. Not the polished deflection, not the mild management of his parents. Something stripped back. Something that looked almost like the 12-year-old who used to come sit with me in the garage when something was wrong. Natalie's hand was on the table, very still. I reached into the folder and produced the last item, a page I had typed myself at the library on the same day I printed the letter. I laid it between the other documents. This is what the next 12 months look like, I said. If nothing changes, rent, utilities, food, the medications, the outstanding ER bill, the follow-up cardiology appointments your mother needs but keeps rescheduling because each one is $240. I pointed to the bottom line. We are short $400 a month. Every month, starting in May. Margaret had not made a sound. I looked at her. She was looking at the documents spread across the white tablecloth, and her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She was Margaret. She kept herself level. I didn't tell her about the medication cost increase, I said, more quietly now, because she would have worried. She worries about being a burden. She has worried about being a burden to you since the first time you told her not to call so often because you were busy. Brendan closed his eyes. I paid $640 to a stranger today, I said, so that your mother could have one dinner where nobody asked her to split the check, where she could sit at a table with her son and feel like she mattered. I looked at my son. $640. That is every dollar I had set aside this spring, and I gave it to a man I met this afternoon because I could not trust you to pay for your mother's $30 pasta. The room was very quiet. Natalie said carefully, "That's not fair. We didn't know. You didn't ask, I said. It's not our responsibility to. He is your husband, I said. She is his mother. She is 68 years old, and her hands shake, and she fell in the kitchen 2 weeks ago, and this, I gestured at her wrist, where the sleeve had shifted and the bruise was visible, is what that looks like. She didn't tell you. She doesn't tell you anything because you have made it very clear for a long time that hearing it would be an inconvenience. Natalie's face had gone through several things. Now it had settled on something flat and careful. Brendan opened his eyes. He was looking at his mother's wrist, at the bruise. Margaret, with great dignity, pulled her sleeve down. "Mum," he said. His voice was unsteady. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not fine," she said. "You're not Ein said." And I was not angry when I said it. I was simply telling the truth. You haven't been fine. You've been choosing between medications and groceries and not telling our son because he's too busy planning a $4 million kitchen renovation to ask. The woman with the pearl earrings at the next table was crying quietly. She made no effort to hide it. Brendan put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands against his face. His shoulders moved once, twice. And then he looked up at me, and he looked, for the first time in a long time, like someone who did not have the answer. "I didn't know," he said, and unlike the things people say when they mean, "I didn't want to know," I thought he meant it. I thought, watching him look at that bruise on his mother's wrist, that he genuinely had not let himself understand what was happening to us. That somewhere, some comfortable story had been running in his head, that we were fine, that we were managing, that people like his parents were always fine, that he had let himself believe it, because believing otherwise would have required him to do something, and doing something would have been hard. I understand that. I am 67 years old, and I understand how easy it is to believe the story that costs you nothing. "I know you didn't," I said. I reached over and took Margaret's hand. She let me. "I'm not asking you for money," I said to my son. "I'm asking you to understand what your life costs. Not the salary, not the house, what it cost the people who gave you everything before you had anything." I looked at him steadily. "You can do whatever you want with that information, but I needed you to have it." Paul Easterwood had not moved from beside the table. Now he looked at me and said, quietly, "Mr. Delaney." I looked at him. "Your money," he said, and held out the envelope. The bill was $712 total. He set the envelope on the table. "The difference is on the house." I started to speak. He raised one hand. "My father worked for the Postal Service for 28 years, Paul said. He retired in 2009. He and my mother lived on his pension for 11 years until he passed. I know what that math looks like." He glanced at Margaret. "Happy Mother's Day, Mrs. Delaney." Margaret pressed her lips together. "Thank you," she managed. Paul nodded and walked away. The restaurant found its breath again, gently, table by table, the murmur of conversation resuming at a careful distance from our table, like water flowing around a stone. Brendan was looking at the envelope, then at the folder of documents, then at his mother. Natalie had not spoken in several minutes. She was looking at the tablecloth. Her expression was not flat anymore. There was something working in it, some private accounting. I did not know what she was calculating. I still don't know, but she was quiet, and that was its own thing. "Can we talk?" Brendan said. He was talking to me. Then he looked at Margaret. "Can we talk, all of us? Can we just?" "Yes," I said. We stayed for another 40 minutes. We did not order anything else. Andrew refilled the water glasses twice without being asked. Brendan asked his mother questions, real questions. When did the medication change? How long had her hands been shaking? Had she seen the cardiologist since October? Margaret answered him carefully, the way she answered things when she was trying not to overwhelm someone she loved. I added what she left out. Natalie said very little. At some point she said, "I didn't realize." And I believe she meant it, or at least meant some version of it. People are complicated. She loved my son in her own way. Whether she loved him enough to change was not something I could know that night. We walked out of Marcello's at 9:15. The evening had cooled. The parking lot was quieter now, most of the Mother's Day crowd gone. The valet brought the Buick around, and I helped Margaret in and walked around to the driver's side. Brendan was standing beside his Mercedes. He looked at me across the roof of the car. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "All right," I said. He called the next morning at 8:15. He asked for the name of Margaret's cardiologist. He asked for the pharmacy number. He asked me to send him the ER bill and the itemized statement I'd put together. I sent them. He called again that afternoon. He'd spoken to the cardiologist's office and scheduled the follow-up appointment his mother had been putting off for 4 months. He'd also, without telling me he was going to, called the pharmacy and set up a recurring monthly payment to cover the difference in the medication cost. Not a loan, just a payment. I sat at the kitchen table after that second call and looked at my hands for a while. Margaret came and stood behind me and put her hands on my shoulders. "What did he say?" she asked. "He handled some things," I said. "What kind of things?" "The medical things," I said. "The bills." She was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me about the pharmacy letter?" I didn't answer right away. Outside the kitchen window, a cardinal was doing something purposeful in the neighbor's yard. "Because I didn't want you to worry," I finally said. She came around the table and sat down across from me, the way she'd been sitting across from me at this same table for 31 years since we bought this house. Her hands were in front of her, folded, still. "Don't do that," she said. "I know, I am not fragile. I know that too. We carry things together," she said. "That was the arrangement. 46 years ago, that was the arrangement." I reached across the table and held her hands. "You're right," I said. "I'm sorry." She turned my hand over and looked at my palm the way she looked at my palm 100 times over the years, like she was reading something in it. Then she folded it closed. "I'm going to make dinner," she said. "Okay." She pushed her chair back and stood, carefully, her right hand on the table for a moment as she found her balance. Then she walked to the kitchen, and I heard the refrigerator open and close, and the soft click of the burner igniting, and the small, ordinary sounds of her moving through the house where we had built our life. I sat at the table for a while longer. I thought about the folder of documents, now back in the drawer of my nightstand. I thought about Paul Easterwood, who understood things about pension math. I thought about Andrew, the waiter, who had been steady and kind through the whole of a difficult evening. I thought about the woman with the pearl earrings who had cried without trying to hide it. And I thought about my son, who had asked questions he should have asked 3 years ago, who had, perhaps, for the first time since he had learned that success was something you displayed, looked at his parents and seen people instead of background. I did not know what Brendan and Natalie's future looked like. I did not know whether that marriage would hold, or what they would build inside that colonial house in Upper Arlington. I did not know whether the man who called twice on Monday was the man he would be going forward, or whether, under the pressure of the life he'd constructed, he would slip back into the comfortable story where his parents were fine. What I knew was this. He called. He asked. He handled the things he could handle. That is not redemption. Redemption is a long road, and Brendan was standing at the beginning of it, looking at the length of it, and not walking away. That was something, that was not nothing. In August, he came to the house for dinner, just him, without Natalie, who was in New York for something related to the house renovation. He brought groceries more than we needed, and he cooked badly, the kind of cooking that results in 2 pans being washed 3 times and a very earnest baked chicken that was slightly underdone in the center. We ate it anyway. We sat at the kitchen table and ate underdone chicken and talked for 3 hours about things we hadn't talked about in years. His first job. The road trip we'd taken when he was 16, his grandfather's workshop, and the smell of sawdust and motor oil that neither of us had smelled since, but both of us could still find instantly in the back of memory. Margaret told the story about the Christmas the furnace broke and we couldn't afford to fix it for 2 weeks, and we all slept in the living room in front of the gas fireplace. Brendan laughed until his eyes watered. He'd been 9 years old, watered. He'd been 9 years old. He remembered it differently, as an adventure, as something that had seemed like the best thing that had ever happened to him. "It was $42 a night at the Comfort Inn," I said, "and we chose the living room." Because you were building something, he said. He was not laughing anymore. You were always building something. Trying to, I said. He looked at me across the table. You did, he said. You built more than you know. I am 67 years old. I have worked for 31 years and lived in this house for 31 years and been married to Margaret for 46. I am not a man who has a lot of opinions about what his life was supposed to mean. But I know what matters. I know the things that cost you nothing to give and everything to lose. I know what a bruise on your wife's wrist looks like when she's been falling and not telling you. I know what it sounds like when someone says that sounds nice and means something else entirely. And I know that the best thing I ever did, better than the envelope in Paul's pocket, better than the folder of documents laid out on the white tablecloth, was stay. Stay at that table. Stay in this house. Stay married to this woman who presses her hands flat against her thighs when they shake so that nobody worries. I would do every bit of it again. In November, Brendan called to ask if we'd come for Thanksgiving, not a brunch. Thanksgiving. The full day, him and Natalie and us, at the apartment he was renting while the house closed. The house that was no longer $4.2 million. The house they had decided, quietly, sometime over the summer, was too much. They were buying something smaller, he said. Still nice. But smaller. Natalie's going to make the turkey, he said, and there was something tentative in his voice. An offering. Tell her I'll bring the pies, Margaret said. She makes very good pies. She has made them every year since before Brendan was born. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs when they shook, and she made the pies, and she brought them. We had a good Thanksgiving. I'm telling you this not because everything is fixed. Things don't fix. They change. They shift. They require every day the choice to show up and ask and listen and not accept the comfortable story that asks nothing of you. What I am telling you is this. The dinner I paid for with $640 was not about the money. It was about making sure that my wife, who had never once in 46 years asked for anything she didn't think I could give, could sit at a table on the one day of the year that was supposed to be hers and feel like she was worth the price of dinner. She was worth more than that. She always was. I hope someday my son understands the full measure of what she costs and what she's worth, and how little those two things have ever had to do with money. I think he's starting to. That's enough for me. I've been thinking about cause and consequence a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical way. Just sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, turning the year over in my mind the way you turn a stone over to see what's underneath. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened to Brendan came out of nowhere, and nothing that happened to Margaret and me came out of nowhere either. We were all, every one of us, living with the results of choices we've been making quietly for years. I made the choice to stay silent too long, to protect my wife from worry instead of letting her carry things with me the way we'd agreed to carry things 46 years ago at a kitchen table in a different house. I told myself I was being strong. What I was actually doing was deciding alone that she couldn't handle it. That is not strength. That is a kind of slow dishonesty dressed up as love. And it cost us. It cost us months of her not knowing, months of me carrying weight I'd made heavier than it needed to be, by refusing to share it. Brendan made the choice, year after year, to accept the comfortable story, that we were fine, that people like his parents are always fine. That story cost him nothing to believe and everything to lose once it collapsed. And the thing about comfortable stories is that they don't collapse gently. They collapse at restaurant tables on Mother's Day, while your mother's sleeve shifts and you see the bruise she didn't tell you about. Natalie made her choices too. I'm not the right person to catalogue them, but I'll say this. When you spend enough years treating other people's pain as an inconvenience, you eventually find yourself sitting at a white tablecloth in a very nice restaurant with a folder of medical documents in front of you and no good answer for any of it. None of that is fate. None of it is luck. It's just consequence. It's just what happens when the things you do and the things you avoid doing finally catch up to where you're standing. What I want you to take from this, if you take anything, is something simpler than a lesson. It's more like a question I've started asking myself every morning. Not a complicated question. Just, did I show up today? Did I ask the people I love how they actually are? Not the polite version, not the version they offer to protect me from worrying, but the real one. Did I let myself be honest about what I'm carrying, instead of building a private architecture of silent sacrifices and hoping someone would eventually notice? Because here's what I know at 67. The people who love you are not mind readers. They will believe the story you give them. If you tell them you're fine, most of them will accept it, not because they don't care, but because caring is uncomfortable and uncertainty is uncomfortable. And most of us are quietly hoping that the people we love are okay so that we don't have to find out they aren't. Brendan is learning that. He's learning it the hard way, the only way some things can be learned. By sitting in the wreckage of the easier choice and deciding to do the harder one instead. Every morning he comes by and checks Margaret's glucose. That's a choice. Every appointment he drives me to. That's a choice. Not grand, not dramatic, just showing up again and doing the work. That's what I mean by character. Not the big moments, the small daily decision to be the kind of person who asks, who listens, who doesn't look away from the answer. That's what builds a life worth living in. That's what builds a family worth coming home to. Margaret pressed her hands flat against her thighs for years, so nobody would worry. She deserved better than that from all of us, including me. I intend to spend whatever time I have left making sure she knows it.